really the scalability came into place when I started to realize that.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of Cyber Confidential. We're diving into the life of an MSP this week with Aramis Hernandez from Synpact. Aramis, welcome to the show.
Hey, Mike, nice to see you again.
You too. All right, give us a little scoop, 30 seconds on Synpact and what you do as the Chief Growth Officer.
So I'm one of the managing partners here at Synpact. We are a combination of two separate entities that came together a few years ago. First half being an IT company where I was CEO, the other half being a telephony company that had been around for about the same amount of time as we were. A few years ago, we saw a strategic idea of coming together to be able to not only provide more tool sets to the client base, but also give really the advantage to all of our clients by adding resources. So since then, we've had the opportunity to both offer internally and externally new advances in the technology space. It's been really helpful, specifically with the new stuff that's coming online, right? The higher level for compliance, the higher need for AI. So it's been a good run so far.
Sweet. Give us the genesis story. How'd you get into the business?
So I started at a way too young age. I think if they would have told me this 25 years ago, I probably would have been, I don't know, a different field, specifically music producing, but I'll save my story for later. As far as the IT space, I was in high school, going into college. I started as an intern at a firm. It was great, but I felt like there was something else for me. And at about 19, I was at a college party with a couple of friends. We were just hanging out. And a lot of my friends at that stage of life, they were still working at malls and restaurants and just doing the college, work labor that they had out there. But I was the only one who actually was doing somewhat of a professional service at my age. They were, let's just say we weren't drinking any beers. And it's just sort of an epiphany occurred when one of my buddies says, "What are you still going to college for? You got a career already." Did not fall asleep because I was drinking heavily that night thinking about this, but I did have a moment of reflection at that stage. About a week or so later, I went back to school, asked my professor what he was making, teaching us IT, and the number was underwhelming. So I pretty much packed it up that semester and I went on my own. I opened up my firm when I was officially and legally at 20. Since then, I've just been in the IT space now over 20 years.
All right, so give us the quick 20-year catch up. If you were back in your 18, 20-year-old shoes, what would you do differently starting the business than now, knowing what you know now?
Operations, standardization, optimization. I would implement all the blend of flavors and spices that I put into systems now. Really would have focused myself on being in a position where scalability was at the forefront of my thought process. Because back then, you're a startup, as many people will understand. Startups start with like a great idea or gumption, but they lead into focusing more on the day-to-day work and less on really sort of strategic vision of how to grow a company. I mean, one of my first domains was onehourtech.com. In my mind, I was going to offer everybody in the city of LA 1 hour technical services, not, thinking like the 1 hour photo development process. Somebody stopped me and said, "Hey kid, how are you going to be able to service people in 1 hour? Driving alone is going to take you at least an hour." So
plus you got to download stuff over dial-up. That's never going to happen.
Yeah, right. So that's never going to happen. So fundamentally, idea was great, but the execution was very, very poor. Just because you're a young person, you're a startup, and it really matters more sort of getting out there and all the vigor and all that. And the execution tends to be a little less graceful than the thought.
So you think, like, when you bring up operations and executions, were you saying that you were doing it more organically back then? Like or did you have checklists that you would follow right from the beginning?
I would have had a better set of procedures and processes that I would have adopted early on, culturally and systemically. just so that I could end up seeing the benefit of being able to scale. It was a lot. It was a lot of learning lessons. It's funny for somebody who didn't finish college, because I saw sort of this opportunity. I tell people all the time now, specifically when I speak with kids, it's like finish college. I think if I would have finished some of those business courses, learned some of those other practices and principles, it would have given me a bit of an edge to be able to start my company day one, knowing the value of all those pieces. Which,
Mm.
I'm 19 going on 20. I don't know what's going on. I just know that I'm a good technical person. I happen to fall into a great network of people, and people really appreciated working with me. So that led me to where I am now.
How long did you go solo before you had your first employee or partner?
Ooh, my first employee, I think it was about 7 years.
Really? You were solo for 7 years?
So for 7 years,
Okay,
I
what was
even got
that
to the
like?
oof. I mean, you're talking accounting, technical support. I I remember having to have the first iteration iPad with the cellular connection, the 3G connection back then, and I was
Right.
literally on the road. This is before autonomous cars, driving and technical support. At the same time with the Bluetooth on, one of those little old school Bluetooths that you had with the
Right.
sticking.
Those weren't cool at the time, and now, like, the earbuds have made everything cool but Bluetooth. Like, we both got Bluetooth earbuds
Yeah,
now.
pretty much. But no,
It
at
was
that
just
point
it
in
was just
life,
cab drivers that had them at one point, and no one
yeah.
thought they were cool.
Well, I was there driving, remote accessing before everything was, sort of standardized like it is now. It was a lot of work. I would work probably 7 days a week, 12 to 18-hour days, most occasions. I was a grinder, but then again, I was a young guy. I had no
Mhm.
kids, I had no responsibilities. It was just work, 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 and it did pretty well. Even on my own, I got to a space where I was doing pretty well for myself.
What was the dynamic like for these 7 years? Like, were you intentionally staying solo, or were you trying to grow to hire more employees but hitting some obstacles?
Both. I think part of it was that again, every profitable dollar was going to me, so that was a very big incentive to stay on my own at that time. Really, the scalability came into place when I started to realize that I had diverted a little bit from being the technical person. I found myself to be more strategic, more overview. I couldn't really find the fun anymore and sitting there and troubleshooting a technical issue for 5 hours, which was something that I early on really appreciated. I loved being stuck on a technical problem. Most people in this industry, that's what it is. They have the engineering mind. So that helps us sort of get to a place where we find glory in the solutioning. I had to stop finding that glory. What I really enjoyed more than anything else was the client relationship. I enjoyed talking to people. I enjoyed sharing with people, exchanging my level of expertise and knowledge with people to be able to better their businesses. And that's really when I said, you know what, I don't see myself being in front of the computer all day long. I don't see myself being as beneficial to my clients that way.
Mhm. Mhm. And so what was that transition like when you're hitting 7 years on and then thinking about spending more of your time delivering the relationship value and less of the technical value and hiring the first technician?
It was a friend of mine, funny enough. It was organic. It was one of those things where, like, hey, so do you want a job? And not having things in place, I had never had employees, so having to put together all the legalities behind that, having to go from a DBA to an S corp. I mean, it was quite a bit of a process. Thankfully, I have found people in my life along the way that just seem to align in those times. So I had this wonderful CPA. Who really helped me get things in motion and helped me make sure that I had everything ready to go. But going back to the same thing, I didn't have those standards and procedures. So, kind of fumbling your way through that entire process. It's interesting to say the least. Which is why we say tell these kids go to college and learn all these things fundamentally. It will help you
Mhm.
develop whatever you want in the future.
What course do they talk about, like, operations and standard operating procedures and task delegation? There's
I
not an
think
engineering school for me.
business courses. I would say more business courses because then you start.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my point. You stop being the technical person. Once you're the technical person, you're focused on resolution. You're focused on the actual tech, the zeros and ones. When you're in business, you're focusing on growth. You're focusing on development. You're focusing on being a professional, being the best professional. I learned a lot of lessons along the way, but it's school of hard knocks. You learn them, but you're not necessarily working off of the very least a framework of a book. You're learning them as a necessity. Every time I found an issue, I found a necessity, I had to put it together.
Yeah.
That's how I structure it versus, hey, you
Right.
know what, guys, I know these pieces are important. Let's invest in developing these pieces to be able to get to a specific space quickly.
Right.
Yeah.
Who was your support system? Because going 7 years solo is a long and lonely process.
Um, I had quite a few mentors. I had a lot of people. I really feel blessed in a lot of ways because there was a lot of people in my path that just happened to they've come in and out of my life in those moments. Even clients. I've had clients who were a great sounding board for my ideas, for my trajectory. They would be the people who I would look up to. I would walk into a place. I remember one of my biggest clients was a pretty sizable construction company doing, they had hundreds of employees. It was one of my first clients. And walking into a space where I used to work for mom and pop, I used to work for 3 to 5 employees. Then you walk into this, sort of ginormous company in my mind, and you're like, whoa, what's going on here? Totally different ball game. And that levels you up. So my support system really was the people around me that just sort of pushed me along the way. And I felt like I built a lot of good relationships because, frankly, for many years, my total source of referrals was those people. It was the people who knew me, the people who I built relationships with, and they became sort of that web. I mean, I can literally trace one of my most recent clients to one of my earliest clients.
Yeah, that's a common thing I hear on this show is that as the business grows, you still retain some of your first clients. Is that the case with you? You have some of your first handful of clients?
Over 20 years, these folks have seen me when I was full of hair and no children to where I am today. So, yeah, I have relationships with people. I've met people along the path who didn't have babies, and now these kids are in college. So, yeah, it's kind of an interesting piece. That's another piece that I really loved about my career was that connection, seeing that evolution of relationships, evolution of life, just being able to connect with
Hmm.
folks and see them grow into whatever paths. Some of them be extremely successful. One of my stories, I have a client who was somewhat of a inventor in the early 2000s, invented something amazing, and became exceedingly wealthy. I mean, when I met this guy, nothing much about him, but then he made a hell of a name for himself. So
Whoa.
it's one of those things where you see that and you're like, well, that's the kind of person I want to be working with. Those are the kind of people that I
Right.
want to be entangled in. Yeah.
What's the typical clientele that you've been serving?
Now we deal mostly with the commercial space, business to business. We deal with quite a few verticals. Construction is one of my early on loves. Just appreciated the early mornings till the early afternoons. It kind of allowed me to have two types of clients, like manufacturing, construction, being the early folks, not being around too late sometimes, to now having people like the legal, accounting, professional services. I find that the dynamicism is really cool. Another cool thing I learned also is I've kind of taken sort of pieces from industries and adapted them to other ones. Uh, Funny enough, some of the principles that I learned in manufacturing, I've applied them to legal firms. You'd go, well, how would you do that? Well, you start to find that there's commonality there. So yeah, my focus has been literally legal, hospitality, healthcare, professional
What's the
services.
crossover example that comes to your mind? The tactic that you got from manufacturers that's going into legal.
Funny enough, accounting systems. You start to
Hmm.
realize in manufacturing had very tight accounting. Why? Because with manufacturing, you have to count every cent. It's the only way you make margin. You're talking about a low margin business, high volume business. So inventory count and margin with respect to how monies are dealt with, managed, and spent allowed me to see under the hood. I've taken those principles and then I look at them at law firms where they've been a little more loosey goosey with how they deal with counting and billing, and I've taken some of those ideas, that information, and go, hey, I bring it to this, and I go, we got to strategize on how to, for example, streamline your accounting process, digitize it completely. And now that we're digitizing it, now let's talk about automating it and making it more efficient. you learn something about efficiency in manufacturing, then you can apply across different verticals just because the principles they make sense. They're just good business practices in the
Hmm.
general level.
Yes. They're quite universal too. Everyone's got to rectify accounts. Everyone has to track whatever goes into the machine to make the revenue on the outbound.
Right. But so many companies don't do that very well. So I bring some of that information. That's where it's a little different too. My approach specifically has been to stop being just a technical person, a technical support or resource, more of a business intelligence resource, more of how I can help you leverage the technology to get that output, to get that resolution, rather than focusing on just rebooting your printers or, giving you a quick response to your password being stuck. I really want to focus on how do I develop your business to that next level while using all those tools that you've expensed quite a bit of money on, rather than
Hmm.
having to just treat them like they're, you know, ancillary.
What was that transition process for you? Because I hear this with a bunch of MSPs, feet well entrenched in being the technician, thinking about technology. And when they talk to clients, they talk about technology and not about ways to make the client's business better. Like the example that you just said, helping them streamline their accounting system. That's a business objective that you're helping them with, not technology problems. And considering your first domain was 1 hour tech, you definitely transitioned from being very tech centric to now talking with clients about how to make their business better. So, what mental process did you go through?
It was the clients. It was the clients asking me questions and putting me in situations, frankly, that required me to think outside the box. There was situations, even simply when it was like, hey, I have QuickBooks, right? Everybody knows QuickBooks. It's a pretty big company. It's dominant in the industry. And then when things started to become more cloud-based, when things started to speak to each other, when APIs, integrations became sort of the new way of doing business, that changed me completely. It was the clients going, hey, I'm trying to connect these dots. It stopped being producing resolution or supporting existing technologies. Now it was me trying to help them integrate. That led to different conversations, then expanded my own mindset with respects to, okay, I'm connecting these dots for you. Let me do that internally. Again, now I'm starting to see the same, it's the same cycle, right? I see the need for myself to optimize and proceduralize my business. Then I started doing that internally and I saw the value. I tell people post COVID, what awakening for me. I really believe there's two types of folks post COVID: the ones who kicked back and got their check and enjoyed whatever travels they did, and then the ones who reinvented themselves or invested heavily in what their future was going to look like. I like to think of myself as the latter, where we invested heavily post COVID in how we internally did a lot of business. This is pre-merger, so we did a lot. We did pretty well actually post COVID. Even though we reduced staff, even though we reduced client base, we were able to produce more margin. So by seeing that example internally work, I was able to see how I can do that to the client base,
Hmm.
and it's been very fruitful in that sense.
Is this the conversation that you lead the clients on when you first engage with them? You talk about, you go through your hit list of, I've seen this being a great way to run your accounting system, or this is your ERP or inventory management. You go through that with them?
I go through, well, my process tends to be a little bit more about, I'm going to go into the tech first because I got to know what tools you have to play with. I can't jump into, hey, we're going to do XYZ over committing just because I don't know. I don't know where they are. I don't know if they're fundamentally ready to go. And I have to be careful because things typically require time and investment. So we have to be very strategic about prioritizing and then executing on those ideas. But my conversation tends to be like, I want you to know first and foremost, I am not simply going to be a technical person. I'm not the guy who you just want to call for email passwords and the guy you're going to call whenever there's an issue. I'm going to be the guy you're going to want to talk to help you standardize and operations and optimize things. I'm going to be here to help you either grow the business as much as you can up to your level or reduce some of that wasted overhead. So yes, I'm going to look at this at a technical standpoint, but like any good accountant, I'm going to see how we can optimize here. I'm going to see how we can help you build this business even better. So that's my goal. My goal is always to change the conversation as to we're a capex, we're an expense line item, into more like we're an investment because I want to produce ROI, because I want to show you that there's more to this. Like almost like getting a bus. A bus is a great investment if you're literally filling it up with people. My goal is to help you build a really solid big bus, so that way you can carry as much as you can and get a lot more return rather than worrying about how much the bus costs or even how much it costs to maintain the bus. Ultimately, the clients tend to be a lot happier that way than just, yeah, I'm the cheapest guy. This is your line, your
Yeah.
bottom line number. This is what you have to pay for IT services. That's such an old way of thinking.
Right. Then they only
Yeah,
frame you as the expense. They're not seeing any of the upside that you're bringing. If they're just asking you about reducing your prices, they're only concerned about the expense part.
I like to bring a lot more, and part of our services includes all that. So there's no additional cost. So when I provide you a packet of services, it includes our time, our intelligence, our availability. Whether it's a simple conversation or question or a regular meeting, we tend to be very much involved, much like the attorneys, the accountants, everybody in that table, that round table. We're there because we're strategically advantageous to you if you wield this correctly.
Mhm. What's the biggest client transformation story you got?
I had a client who was bleeding 7 figures of waste, no rein on any form of budget control. So it was tough. We were able to reduce that waste almost immediately within the first year, and then bring in the budget, get to a place now where budget is concise, growth is parallel to actual firm growth. It's makes sense mathematically, and as a business expense, as a business investment, it makes total sense. And then also be able to safeguard them. Um, that was probably my biggest glory so far, that I was able to take something of that nature, that big, and truly optimize it to a point where the clients are not only trusting of me, but they are happy with the results. They see the value and they get the idea.
So this was like a QuickBooks thing, and you helped them get organized, or what were they
It
doing
was
before with the budget that it was so out of control?
That was what it was. There was no budget control. It was expense after expense. There was really nobody overseeing it correctly, even though they had somebody in charge. They were not doing a good job. Most of the time, people call us when somebody's failing to do their job well. Most of the time, people are reaching out to me because they've identified a problem and now they need to find a better solution. So, walking into a situation like that, yeah, there was no oversight, proper management, mismanagement, quite frankly. And my job was really to come in, assess, right? First a technical assessment, then a business assessment. I tend to do them both hand in hand. So again, I know exactly what I'm doing, with who I'm working with, what I'm doing, and what tools I have to use to do the job. Then it was okay. Let's reverse engineer this. Let's break it down. Let's put control systems. I'll give you an example. Their cell phone bill was over 10 grand a month. I came in,
Okay.
right, 10
Okay.
grand a month just on cell phone. I was
How many
able to see
employees are we talking?
just with cell phones, company cell phones, less than 100 employees. It was like 80 something employees with just company owned cell
Okay.
phones. There's
So
other
they're paying more than
employees
$100 per line per month.
per line.
That's double.
Right. I came in and I was like, something's wrong here. I put together a solution, a system in place. We were able to manage this and we cut the bill to less than half within a six
Right.
month period. So those are small things, but when you start budgeting that over the year, you're like, oh man, that's like 60 grand these guys are saving now. 60 grand they
Right.
didn't have
Totally.
before.
Totally. Hey, you paid for
Right.
yourself. You just paid for yourself by cutting down
Pretty
their phone
much.
bill.
And that was just one
Okay.
small example. I had to do that with all their IT assets. They had so many ISP services because no one was properly managing that. They were paying for ISPs they weren't even using at locations they didn't have anymore. I cut that bill down by almost 2/3. So
That's tough. That's tough because
yeah,
you know that they were being taken advantage of.
correct.
It's tough, but it's good that this is what happened. This is the payback on when someone's responsible for it. Then
Right.
they look, and immediately the two of us know $100 per line. That's way too expensive. Immediately we know, but the person not familiar doesn't know.
Right. And they were just used to having sort of that expense. Now that they have this expense and it's controlled, night and day. It's much simpler conversations, much more fruitful conversations, and I educate. I love to show the client, hey, this is the problem, here's the solution, and this is what the oversight looks like. So, God forbid I get hit by a bus tomorrow. you know better. You know now more information. These systems are going to outlast me. These ideas are going to outlast me because they're just good business practices. And I love having to share that information with the clients.
Excellent. Cool. Okay. I love hearing when someone's been in business for 20 years because then my mind really gets curious. Okay. Fun question. What we can all point to things that have changed in the last 20 years with computers. That's the easy one. Okay. What has stayed the same in the last 20 years when it comes to small businesses and their relationship to technology?
I would say sort of the environmental piece. Windows is still Windows, and you're still going to have to chase it down with a, extinguisher all the time. I would say security is about the same with respects to the fear, but it's changed. I tell people all the time, back in the day, the hackers were a bunch of dudes in a room, typically in a basement, having fun, enjoying themselves, sort of playing on top of each other. Um, Now it's a business, but the pieces are still the same. Maybe the way the game is played is different, but it's still a concern. I would also say that the perspective. People still see technology as a lot of people, not most, but a lot of people see it as just a necessary evil that they have to deal with. That's always been the case. I've very rarely met people who have genuinely been like, I love technology. I get it. It's got all these benefits. Most people just think of it like, it's a phone, it's a computer, it's a
Hmm.
screen.
Hmm.
And so there's still that sentiment of it being very, very simple, very basic. Uh, that mindset hasn't changed so far, in my opinion.
So then that I hear often. So what's your adaptation so that you can work with that mindset? Because this is the nature of your business. You're their technology leader, so you have to show them the value, the proactive value, how technology can grow their business. How do you position it? Like, let's use your construction or manufacturing companies. I'm sure there's equipment in those manufacturers that are older than your business. They bought more than 20 years ago. So
Absolutely.
that's their pre-existing condition when they think about equipment. It's a 30, 40 year, like, you got a bandsaw. This thing's good for 50 years at least. Keep oiling it.
I I look at the possibilities. So I don't go after that piece of equipment that's, older than me, which is tough at this point in my life. But what I do go after is, hey, give you a good example. It takes your processing team in manufacturing so much time to flow from beginning to end in your process. Plus, you have no way to figure out any level of mm, benchmarks. You have no way to truly see what stage you're in. You have no KPIs behind this. You have no data. So how about we look at improving your Wi-Fi and then adding tablets across your line to ensure that as things are being touched, you're getting some of that receptive feedback in real time. Now where you can actually time how long it takes from A to Z and then see what's going on, whether you have too many employees, you don't have enough employees, something's wrong within your manufacturing process. So I don't worry so much about that old machine. I focus on what is viable and available because sometimes you have to sort of prove your ability and your intelligence. And I like to do it in things that I can really sort of capture with data, with irrefutable information, where the client's going to go, okay, this makes sense. Plus, also, I don't want to add a huge expense because sometimes that old machine is worth $500,000 or $1 million. It's going to be tough to be like, let's buy the new model that has 30% better whatever, versus I spend a fraction of that money, process this idea, and be able to see the fruitfulness of it all. Then we can have a bigger conversation. I don't like coming in and having a throw the baby with the bathwater approach when it comes to the client relationship. I like to be steady, do small things, even improving networks. So many times I've come in and just, you've got 14-year-old switches. This is the reason why your network is collapsing every 3 days. Let's do that piece. You'll see the benefit, and more often than not, the clients will go, wow, you're right. This was a way better investment than anything else we had in mind. And it was a fraction of what we were thinking about spending. That helps a lot. It helps a lot of the conversation and the trust factor.
In the manufacturing vertical, you get a lot of the digital transformation consultants that love throwing sensors on everything and really chase after, at least in Canada, at least because I know a bunch of them, chase after the manufacturers for like put sensors on everything, track everything, barcode everything, QR code everything, sensor here, and there's got to be some sweet spot here where what's your experience in that? What metrics do the manufacturers need to care about, and what's just vanity that may be a distracting shiny object that they don't need to know?
Honestly, inventory control, because you need to make sure your product is available and where it went and who has it, because that's generally your money. I mean, at the end of the day, whatever you're producing, inventory control is huge and key. Uh, and then throughout the process itself, I would say the milestones of a process. I don't need to track every 3 steps. If I can track every 10 steps because it's a 50-step process, I'm going to be able to give you enough data. Could you get more granular? Absolutely. But that's where I like to build systems that are capable of providing granularity. However, not necessarily starting that route, right? If you forethink enough of a process or an idea to where you go, okay, I'm going to get the basics from A to F, right? Quickly here, knowing that I can add A to Z down the line, then it's much simpler than to try to put this whole idea in, because even then, these ideas fundamentally don't work operationally. Another thing I've learned about business fundamentals is I can't come in and change someone's operations from night to day. It doesn't work that way. I have to be able to slowly, strategically, and with a lot of patience, get things in place. Adoption rates have to change. I got to get everybody to take a bite out of that apple. So I have to be very careful on how I'm making these changes to be able to get that benefit and that actual result. So it's being mindful of humans, it's being mindful of costs, it's being mindful of operational changes. You have to take into consideration a lot of these things to be able to be successful in producing a final result.
Yeah, I mean, I fall into this trap even with my own business of like, I got metrics all over the place. I got dashboards because the task tracking app that I use has got dashboards for everything, and I got to keep reining myself in. And the litmus test for me is if this number increases or decreases by 10 times, does it make a difference to me? If yes, if I would have to take a reaction, then this is an important thing to track. If not, stop caring about this. And
Right.
maybe that applies to these lines too, because they're a little bit more sequential, but there's still a ton of human interaction, which I get why you can't force change overnight. This is probably not one of those cases where you cut once and cut deep type thing. Like this is a golden BBs instead of silver bullet. Is that how you see it?
Absolutely. Plus, you have to consider that these processes will change over time. I've had manufacturing clients who were manufacturing a certain type of product, and then they got an idea of switching into a new line of product, and I have to be as mutable as they are. So the ideas have to withstand that change and trends, market changes. It's got to withstand, at the very least, a good 5 to 7 years of minimum changes, because people aren't going to invest that kind of money every 3 years, right? It's not like buying a new laptop or like, oh, hey, sure, we'll just throw out this entire system and bring in a new one. So we're consistently thinking that how do I get you something good for now, last you a while, but then be in a position where we can move forward in a different direction down the line. And frankly, it changes the culture. I found it when the clients start to see the value in how the tool sets are used and the value of the technology being literally like leveraged to a point where they're getting money back, they change that ideology of like, oh, what's the cheapest way of doing this, to how can I get the biggest return? And what would that tool set? What did that solution look like? I've seen that with the firms that I've worked with, where they started with like, no, keep it cheap, to small ideas led to bigger returns. And now they're like, okay, walk me through my top line return and my bottom line return. Now the conversation is not returns, no longer what's the cheapest way. So it really helps a lot to have that conversation.
Exactly. Okay, so you're standing on the pillars of 20 years of experience here, Aramis. What's the next 5 to 10 years? What gets you excited for the next 5 to 10 years? What are you looking forward to?
Really, the conversations change more to security, compliance, being able to bring everything together. I'm finding that between the AI governance, the security piece becoming such a huge component now that everything is cloud centric, there is this blend. And I'm foreseeing the future to being a lot of automation, a lot of artificial intelligence, but more importantly, a lot of the controls that we have to have in place to not only be able to leverage it correctly and appropriately, but being able to, at the very least, insulate organizations from IP theft, from just the blend of their secret spices, right? Like if every manufacturer did it the exact same way and expect the same results, there'd be no competitive advantage. So my goal now is to look at how these tools, how these ideas, how these investments will ultimately lead you to that competitive advantage. Everybody, a few years ago, someone told me every company's in the tech business now, which I find to be true. Everybody's focusing on how to leverage all these tools, how to leverage all these ideas. But it's more important than that because something like ChatGPT, not really the greatest way of building your library of legal documents or your engineering plans. I'm sure you can get some information, but the moment you load data in there, it's exposed. So how do I help our clients focus on doing the right things, putting the right integrations, setting the right expectations? I had a client conversation recently for AI. He was talking about AI and I said, listen, I think it's great. Let's find the right blend. But I said, at the beginning of this, you're going to find that your costs are going to increase because now you're going to pay for the tool set and you're going to pay for the labor, the manual labor, right? The human piece. Eventually, it's going to drop. So your human factor will go low, but your AI cost will start to elevate. Down the line, though, you'll see that it's much more fruitful when it comes to bottom line. Because at the beginning of any sort of investment, you're going to be upside down. You have to sort of ride the wave to get to the other side. So that's what it is. It's setting the right expectations. A lot of people speak about AI. It's like a thing that you just throw in there, right? It's just throw the cog of AI
very
in there.
amorphous. AI.
Right. Yeah, right. But
it's
they
like
throw it
saying
in there
computers.
like,
Yes, computers.
yeah,
We do need
right.
computers.
But nobody ever thinks about the time of adoption, the time to actually get it going, the time to somewhat figure it out in the organization to where it's now a lot more efficient. So I try to establish those expectations early on. The idea there is that I'm consulting not only on the technology piece, but I'm also giving you that business insight. I need to make sure your mind isn't sitting on, hey man, I just spent all this money on AI. How come I'm not a billionaire yet? Doesn't work that way, buddy. You gotta right. We have to go through
Unfortunately,
this
it doesn't
entire
work
process.
like that. It's
Yeah,
not
it's like
that
anything.
good. Soon it might be good enough to do that.
It's like planting a tree. You got to be patient. You got to water it. You got to give it some sun, and eventually it will grow to be a fruitful endeavor. But between now and let's say a year from now, we got to ride the storm. So let's budget correctly. These are the conversations that most technology people don't have with the clients. Like those expectations, those ideas that they're not just like, here's an invoice or here's an estimate to do AI. Like that's cool, but now what?
Cool. How big Synpact now?
We're 23 staff. We're 4 partners.
From solo.
From solo.
It's quite the journey.
Yeah, it's been 22 years now. I've been in business, so yeah. Don't age me, please. So
excellent, fantastic. Well, it's wonderful to hear your story. And whenever congratulations on retaining the clients for 20 years, because that's no small feat. People are fickle and they move and their lives change. Like you said, you've had children since you started the business. So have your clients. Their entire lives have changed in the last 20 years. And the fact that they're still with you and can still justify you as part of their operating expenses means that you're giving them good value.
And that's my goal. It's always been my goal. I guess that's really what transitioned me in life was how do I provide a benefit to the people around me? Because if it's a good relationship, it's a give and take. And I have really fundamentally great relationships with people.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for joining us on this episode of Cyber Confidential, where this has been put together by the Managed Service Provider Association of America. If you're watching this, you're probably seeing Aramis on his Synpact profile page in the MSPAA directory. Aramis, great to have you. Great to have you on the show and hear your lifetime journey from solo onehourtech.com to now, like you're in the meat of the small business industry, 20, 25 employees. That's great. That's huge.
I
Congrats on
appreciate it.
doing
Thanks.
that.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate you taking the time and setting this up for us too as well.
All right. Tell everyone where they can find more about you. They're going to see you on the MSPAA website, but tell us about Synpact and where they can find you.
So you can visit us at synpact.com. That's synpact.com. You'll be able to read a lot of our case studies, our information, stuff that we've been doing. And you can always reach us at 888-764-5678.
Fantastic. All right, Aramis. Great to have you on the show. Thanks a lot for joining this episode of Cyber Confidential. To everyone watching, see you on the next episode.
Thanks, Mike. Bye.
Enjoyed this episode? Hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe.